If no group hits the target, a runoff will be held between the two biggest parties to decide which gets the absolute majority.
Runoff can refer to rainwater, which goes into ditches and then ends up in the water at some point. But it also refers to a second election between the leading politicians, which is not to say that politicians are like water in ditches, but who knows? Maybe they are. In any case, if you have, let's say, 4 or 5 people running for an office, they'll hold a second election with just the 2 main people that won the highest votes. And then whoever wins the runoff election gets elected. So a runoff is a further competition, oftentimes a second competition for an election or race after a tie or inconclusive result. And usually it's for elections, but presumably it could also be for other things, sporting events or other types of contests. Oftentimes words referring to competitive contests are made by adding the word off to the end of the word. So we have runoff. You can also have a bake-off, which would be a baking contest, or you could have a cook-off or a chili-off. Rahm Emanuel, who is the mayor of Chicago, he won the election in a runoff election. The first round, there were probably 5 or 6 people running for mayor, and then he was one of the top 2 people, and he finally won the runoff election. Nashville also is headed towards a runoff election. They had an election just a few days ago with 4 or 5 top candidates, and there's the 2 top candidates. They're going to run again to see who wins the mayor position.
The frequency with which governments announce investment initiatives, job creation programs and economy-boosting schemes is a sure sign that an election is in the offing.
Offing means something in the distance. Originally, it was a nautical term when either someone was on shore looking into the distance to see if there were any boats coming, and then if there was a boat coming, they would say there's a boat in the offing. And then presumably it was used if you're on a boat too, and then you're going somewhere and you see an island where you're supposed to go, so you would say the island is in the offing too. So now it refers to anything that is in the future where you can anticipate the future event actually happening. Now, this does not mean that the future event has to happen, but generally it suggests that there's a very strong possibility that it will. So let's say 2 people are going to get married. You can say it looks like there is a marriage ceremony in the offing. Or if somebody's interviewing, they could say, well, it looks like I may have a job offer into the offing, which means it hasn't happened yet, but it looks like there's a strong possibility that it will. So if you say something's in the offing, it could mean that it is off in the distance, either visually, or it could mean it's off in the distance in some sort of time sequence, but within the realm of possibility. I went to the Navy Pier the other day, and I looked out onto Lake Michigan, and believe it or not, there was a huge battleship in the offing on its way to Navy Pier. So I hung out for, a couple hours. It finally arrived and docked right at the pier. It was so far away, it took a long time for it to get there. Things have been real slow around the office lately, and I've actually been afraid of losing my job. But then, just in the last couple of weeks, it looks like we have several major projects in the offing. And at the very least, I'm going to be able to keep my job. And most likely, I'm going to be very busy once these jobs arrive.
Exactly a year ago, on May 2nd, 2014, two groups of protesters clashed in central Odessa. A heady post-revolutionary haze hung over Ukraine.
Heady refers to a mental attitude of exuberance over events typically caused by some great revelation or series of events, or it can also be from being young. Young people tend to get very heady. They get these grand ideas about what they're going to do with their lives, and sometimes it works out pretty well, and but sometimes it doesn't. So, good example in modern life is when there have been revolutions. Oftentimes, immediately after the revolution, there's a very heady feel because people feel that some great, wonderful things are going to happen, which oftentimes doesn't. They end up putting people up against the wall and turns into a dictatorship. But before that happens, there's oftentimes a great heady feel. So in the context of having a heady post-revolutionary haze, there would be a very strong, exhilarating effect on people from the revolution. And also heady can mean to be exhilarated from drinking liquor as well, which I think is probably a slightly old-fashioned term, but that describes the feeling of exhilaration or exuberance that people feel over certain types of events or over thinking in certain ways. So when people get intoxicated with alcohol, oftentimes they get a heady feeling of exhilaration or exuberance. I can remember when I was in college, used to go to these coffee shops, and they'd have these poets, and they would do this poetry, and then we'd sit around and we'd talk about Marxism and how we were going to cause a revolution and change the whole world. And at the time, I thought that was, a pretty normal way to think, to get very heady about intellectual things and about what we were going to do. But then later, I figured out that the world's more complicated than I thought. A lot of young people, when they're successful, they can get very heady with success. Now, if they're in some high-powered field, that's certainly a good thing for them. But one of the major issues for the older executives is how to contain that headiness so that they can still get the performance out of the young people without letting their success go to their heads. So usually there's an adjustment process that people go through where they realize that their successes are important, but they may not be quite as earth-shattering as they thought they might be.
That's all for today. Tom Taylor is an ESL tutor. He teaches English in the United States and outside, all over the world, using Skype. He can be reached at his website, which is
ESL-fullsteamahead.com.
Click on this link and check out his website and email with questions. Thank you, Tom, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.